Hashtag he won a pregnant bride in a poker game and folded his whole ranch into her lap. The sky burned orange over the Blackwater Ranch as James McKinnon stood motionless on his weathered porch. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and heavy with promise. Between calloused fingers, he turned a single playing card, the Queen of Hearts, edges soft from years of handling. The wind picked up, carrying dust across the yard, stirring the memories he'd tried to bury. 5 years since Sarah had passed. 5 years of silence filling the rooms of a house built for a family. 5 years of work without purpose. James tucked the card into his shirt pocket, close to his heart, where it had lived since that night. The night that changed everything. Thunder rumbled in the distance, nature's warning of what was coming. But James knew some storms you can't outrun. Some gambles change your life forever. The Blackwater spread had been in the McKinnon family for 3 generations. 200 acres of hard country, beautiful in its severity. The main house stood like a sentinel against the elements, its wooden bones weathered but strong. A barn leaned slightly to the east, as if perpetually bracing against the wind. The corral held 3 horses, the pride of James's modest operation. At 47, James wore his years in the lines around his eyes and the silver threading through his dark hair. His frame remained solid, built by decades of ranch work that started before dawn and ended long after sunset. He moved with the deliberate efficiency of a man who wasted nothing, not even motion. Inside the house, photographs lined the mantel. Sarah smiled from behind glass. Forever 36, forever beautiful. Their wedding day. A Christmas morning. Sarah on horseback, laughing at something James had said. He'd stopped looking at them years ago, but couldn't bring himself to put them away. Each evening followed the same ritual. Dinner alone at the kitchen table. A glass of whiskey on the porch. Sleep that came reluctantly and left too soon. The ranch demanded everything, and James gave it willingly. The physical exhaustion was a blessing. It left no energy for grief. The only company he kept was his border collie, Rusty, who followed at his heels during the day and slept at the foot of his bed at night. Occasionally, he'd ride into town for supplies, exchanging the minimum pleasantries required before returning to his solitude. The land provided everything he needed and nothing he wanted. It was a Tuesday when Hank Williams, no relation to the singer, as he'd remind anyone who asked, pulled up to the ranch in his battered Ford truck. James was mending fence in the north pasture when he heard the familiar rumble of the engine. "McKinnon," Hank called, climbing out of the cab. "You still alive out here or what?" James nodded, hammering one last nail before setting his tools down. More or less. Hank was a decade older than James, with a face mapped by sun and whiskey. They'd known each other since James was a boy, when Hank had worked for James's father. "Thought I'd check on you." "Been, what, 3 months?" "Something like that," James replied, wiping sweat from his brow. They walked back to the house in comfortable silence. James poured coffee, and they sat at the kitchen table, a routine as old as their friendship. "Got something that might interest you," Hank said finally. "Poker game tonight at Sullivan's. Been a while since you showed your face." James shook his head. "Got too much to do around here. Ranch'll still be here tomorrow. Besides," Hank leaned forward, "heard there's some new blood in town. Might be worth seeing what's what." James stared into his coffee. The last time he played cards was with Sarah, the night before she took sick. She'd beaten him soundly, laughing as she collected her winnings, a week of him doing the dishes. "One night, James. You're turning into a ghost out here." Perhaps it was the memory of Sarah's laugh, or simply the weight of too many identical days, but James found himself nodding. "All right, one game." Sullivan's hadn't changed in 20 years. The same scarred bar, the same dim lighting, the same smell of beer and smoke despite the smoking ban. James felt eyes track him as he entered, a reminder of how rarely he came to town. Hank nodded toward the back room where the serious games happened. 5 men sat around the table, chips stacked before them. James recognized most of them, local ranchers and business owners. The 6th player sat with her back to the door. When she turned, James felt something shift in the air. She was young, mid-20s maybe, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her eyes were the color of whiskey, sharp and assessing. But what caught James's attention was the unmistakable swell of her belly beneath a loose flannel shirt. "This is Lucy," Hank said, passing through town. Lucy didn't smile, just nodded once. Her hands moved constantly, shuffling chips with practiced ease. "You in or not?" asked Tom Sullivan, the bar's owner. James took the empty chair across from Lucy. "I'm in." The first few hands were unremarkable. James played conservatively, watching more than betting. Lucy played with a recklessness that suggested desperation, winning big, then losing it all in the next hand. "Where you headed?" Tom asked her during a shuffle. "West," she answered, not looking up. "California, maybe." "Long way to go in your condition," observed Bill Harris, the hardware store owner. Lucy's eyes flashed. "I'll manage." The night wore on. Players dropped out as their funds dwindled. Eventually, only James, Lucy, and Tom remained. The pot had grown substantial, more money than James had seen in one place in years. Then came the hand that changed everything. Tom dealt. James looked at his cards. 2 pair, kings and tens. Good, but not unbeatable. Lucy bet aggressively. Her remaining chips pushed to the center without hesitation. Tom folded with a curse. "I'll see you," James said, matching her bet. Lucy hesitated, then spoke words that hung in the air like smoke. "I'm out of cash, but I've got something else to wager." "This ain't that kind of establishment," Tom warned. "My grandfather's pocket watch. Gold. Worth more than everything on this table." James studied her face, seeing the lie but also the desperation behind it. "Let's see it." She pulled it from her pocket. A tarnished timepiece that might once have been valuable. Now it was just old. "Not enough," James said quietly. Lucy's jaw tightened. "Then what do you suggest?" Later, James would wonder what made him say it. Perhaps it was the way her hands trembled slightly despite her fierce expression. Perhaps it was the memory of Sarah saying he had a weakness for strays. "I need help at my ranch. 3 months' work in exchange for what you owe. Room and board included." The room went silent. Lucy stared at him, then at her cards, calculating. "And if I win, you get the pot. And my truck." Tom whistled low. "James, that's my business," James finished firmly. Lucy nodded once. "Deal." She laid down her cards. 3 queens. A strong hand. James revealed his kings and tens. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Lucy's shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly. "When do I start?" The drive back to Blackwater was silent. Rain had started to fall, drumming on the truck's roof. Lucy stared out the passenger window, one hand resting on her belly. "How far along?" James finally asked. 7 months, she answered without looking at him. "Father in the picture?" "No." James nodded, letting the subject drop. The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm as they turned onto the dirt road leading to the ranch. "It's not much," he said as the house came into view. "But it's dry and warm." Lucy didn't respond, just gathered the small backpack at her feet, apparently all she owned in the world. James showed her to the guest room. Untouched since Sarah died. Bathrooms down the hall. Kitchens open whenever you're hungry. Lucy stood in the center of the room, looking small and out of place. "What work do you need done?" "We'll talk about that tomorrow. Get some rest." He closed the door behind him, wondering what the hell he'd just done. Morning came with clear skies and the realization that James now had a pregnant stranger living in his home. He found Lucy in the kitchen, already dressed, making coffee. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I work for my keep," she replied simply. "Always have." They ate breakfast in awkward silence. Rusty sat at Lucy's feet, his trader's heart already won over. "I can cook, clean, mend," Lucy said finally. "Can't do heavy lifting in my condition, but I'm not useless." "Never said you were." James pushed his plate away. "House needs attention. Been neglecting it. Start there if you want." Lucy nodded, already clearing the dishes. James escaped to the barn, unsettled by the presence of another person in spaces that had been empty for so long. He worked through the morning, checking on the horses, mending tack, anything to avoid going back to the house. When he finally returned for lunch, he found the kitchen transformed. Surfaces gleamed. The floor had been mopped. The air smelled of lemon and fresh bread. Lucy stood at the stove, stirring something that made James's stomach growl. "Hope you like stew," she said without turning. "Haven't had homemade in years." They ate at the table, the silence less strained than before. James found himself watching her hands, small but strong, efficient in their movements. "Why'd you do it?" Lucy asked suddenly. "Offer me the job instead of taking the watch." James considered his answer carefully. "Ranch needs help. You need somewhere to stay. Simple as that." Simple as that. Lucy's eyes said she didn't believe him, but she didn't press further. Days passed, settling into an unexpected rhythm. Lucy proved herself capable and hardworking, transforming the neglected house room by room. She didn't talk much about herself, and James didn't ask. Their conversations revolved around practical matters: what needed fixing, what supplies were running low. At night, James would sometimes hear her pacing, unable to sleep. Once, he found her on the porch at dawn, watching the sunrise with such longing it made his chest ache. "Everything all right?" he asked. She startled, quickly wiping her eyes. "Fine. Just restless." James leaned against the railing beside her. "Baby keeping you up?" "Something like that." She placed a hand on her belly. "She's active at night." A small smile. "Just a feeling." They watched the sun climb higher, painting the land in gold. For the first time in years, James felt the beauty of it rather than just the work it represented. "Thank you," Lucy said suddenly, "for not asking questions." James nodded. Everyone's entitled to their secrets. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spider silk. Then Lucy straightened, mask back in place. "I should start breakfast." As April turned to May, Lucy's presence became less intrusion and more comfort. James found himself looking forward to returning to the house, to the smell of cooking and the sound of another voice. He started sharing stories about the ranch, about his family's history there. Lucy listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she cared about more than just passing time. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset, Lucy finally offered a piece of herself. "I grew up in foster care," she said quietly. "Never stayed anywhere long enough to call it home." James waited, sensing there was more. "When I found out I was pregnant, I promised myself my baby would have what I never did. Stability. Safety." Her voice hardened. "I was saving money, doing everything right. Then the baby's father cleaned out our account and disappeared." "That why you were gambling?" Lucy nodded. "Desperate people make desperate choices." James thought about the recklessness of her betting that night. "Were you trying to lose?" Her silence was answer enough. "You could stay," he said, surprising himself. "After the baby. After your 3 months." Lucy looked at him sharply. "Why would you offer that?" "Like I said, ranch needs help. And that's all." James stood, suddenly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Getting late. I'll check on the horses before turning in." He felt her eyes on his back as he walked away, unable to answer a question he hadn't fully asked himself. The following week brought the first real complication. James was in town for supplies when he overheard a conversation at the general store. "McKinnon's got a woman living out there now," said a voice he recognized as Bill Harris's wife. "Young thing. Pregnant, no less." "Always figured him for the decent sort," replied another woman. "Guess grief changes a person." James rounded the corner, fixing them with a level stare. "Morning, ladies." They had the grace to look embarrassed, mumbling greetings before hurrying away. Hank found him loading feed into his truck. "Heard the gossip?" "Just did. People will talk. Nature of small towns." James secured the last bag. "Don't much care what they say about me. But Lucy doesn't deserve it." Hank studied him. "Known you most of your life, James. Never seen you get riled over talk before." "Nothing to get riled about. Just setting facts straight." "If you say so." Hank's expression turned serious. "But you might want to ask yourself why you care so much." James drove home with Hank's words echoing in his mind. The truth was, he didn't know why Lucy's presence had affected him so deeply. Or perhaps he did, and wasn't ready to admit it. When he arrived home, he found Lucy in the garden she'd started behind the house. She looked up as he approached, shielding her eyes against the sun. "Town all right?" she asked. "Fine." He hesitated, then added, "People are talking." Lucy's expression didn't change. "People always talk. Doesn't matter." "Matters to me." She stood with some difficulty, one hand supporting her lower back. Her belly had grown noticeably in the weeks she'd been there. "James, I've been judged my whole life. For being an orphan. For being poor. For getting pregnant." Her eyes met his steadily. "Words don't hurt me anymore." But James saw the lie in the tightness around her mouth, the slight tremble in her voice. He wanted to tell her that she deserved better, that she was worth defending. Instead, he simply nodded. "Need help with anything before dinner?" Lucy's smile was small but genuine. "I'm managing." That night, unable to sleep, James found himself in the barn. In a corner, beneath years of accumulated tools and supplies, sat a trunk he hadn't opened since Sarah died. Something compelled him to dig it out now. Inside were Sarah's personal belongings, her favorite books, letters from her mother, the dress she'd worn on their wedding day. And beneath it all, a leather-bound journal. James had never read it while she was alive, respecting her privacy. Now, he opened it carefully, as if it might crumble in his hands. Sarah's handwriting filled the pages, thoughts about their life together, hopes for the future. He read for hours, sometimes smiling, sometimes wiping away tears. Then he reached an entry dated just months before her death. James works so hard to make this place perfect, she'd written. He doesn't understand that it's not the land that makes a home, it's the love that fills it. My greatest fear isn't dying. It's that he'll retreat into himself and forget how to live, how to love. I pray he finds someone who reminds him that his heart is too big to live in solitude. James closed the journal, his hands shaking. Sarah had known him better than he knew himself, had seen this possibility, him alone, shutting out the world, and feared it. He returned to the house, pausing outside Lucy's door. Soft sounds of movement came from within. She was awake, probably pacing again. He raised his hand to knock, then lowered it. Whatever was happening between them, he wasn't ready to name it yet. The next morning, James announced he needed to ride the fence line, checking for breaks after the recent storms. To his surprise, Lucy asked to join him. Doctor said light exercise is good, she explained when he hesitated. And I've never been on a horse. All the more reason to stay home. Please, James. I'm going stir-crazy in the house. He couldn't argue with the longing in her voice. All right, but we take it slow, and you tell me the minute you're uncomfortable. He saddled Daisy, his gentlest mare, and helped Lucy mount. She settled in the saddle with unexpected grace, her hands finding the reins naturally. Sure you've never ridden before? He asked, swinging onto his own horse. Lucy's smile was mischievous. Maybe I'm just a fast learner. They rode at a walk, James constantly checking to ensure Lucy was steady. The day was perfect, clear blue sky, mild temperature, wildflowers dotting the pastures. Lucy's face glowed with pleasure as she took in the vastness of the ranch. It's beautiful, she said. I see why you love it. Been in my family since my grandfather's time. He built the house with his own hands. You ever think of selling? Moving somewhere easier? James shook his head. Land's in my blood. Wouldn't know who I was without it. They stopped by a creek for lunch. James had packed sandwiches and thermoses of coffee. Lucy sat on a fallen log, watching the water flow. When I was little, she said, I used to imagine having a place like this. Somewhere that belonged just to me. Somewhere no one could make me leave. James thought about all the places she must have been forced to leave in her life. All the times she'd had to start over. What about you? She asked. You ever imagine a different life? Used to dream of traveling. Sarah and I talked about seeing the Grand Canyon, the ocean. He smiled at the memory. Never got around to it. Always next year, we said. You could still go. Maybe someday. Lucy was quiet for a moment. She must have been special. Your wife. She was. James found that the pain of speaking about Sarah had dulled. Would have liked you, I think. She had a way of seeing the good in people. Even people who gamble away what little they have. Especially them. Lucy laughed. A sound so unexpected and bright that James couldn't help but join in. It felt foreign, this laughter, like a muscle long and used. They were halfway back to the house when the sky darkened suddenly. A spring storm, rolling in faster than James had anticipated. We need to hurry, he said, eyeing the clouds. Can you manage a trot? Lucy nodded, determination replacing anxiety. They quickened their pace, but the rain caught them anyway. A drenching downpour that soaked them to the skin in minutes. By the time they reached the barn, Lucy was shivering violently. James helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist longer than necessary. You're freezing, he said, concern overriding propriety. Let's get you inside. The house was dark and cold. James built a fire while Lucy changed into dry clothes. When she returned to the living room, wrapped in a blanket, her face was pale. You all right? He asked. She nodded, but her arms were wrapped protectively around her belly. Just tired. James didn't believe her, but didn't push. Sit by the fire. I'll make tea. In the kitchen, he moved automatically, filling the kettle, finding mugs. His mind replayed the day, Lucy's smile, her laughter, the weight of her in his arms as he helped her from the horse. Feelings he'd thought long buried stirred uncomfortably. When he returned with the tea, he found Lucy asleep on the couch, the firelight playing across her face. She looked younger in sleep, the weariness gone from her features. James set the mugs down quietly and covered her with another blanket. Before he could move away, Lucy's hand caught his. Her eyes opened, unfocused with sleep. "Stay," she murmured. James hesitated, then sat beside her. Lucy shifted, resting her head against his shoulder. Within moments, her breathing deepened again. He sat motionless, afraid to disturb her, more afraid of the comfort her presence brought him. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, something like peace settled over the house. The next morning, Lucy was quieter than usual, wincing occasionally as she moved around the kitchen. James watched her with growing concern. "Maybe we should call the doctor," he suggested when she paused, gripping the counter. "I'm fine. Just overdid it yesterday." But by afternoon, her discomfort was impossible to ignore. James found her in the garden, bent double, face contorted in pain. "That's it," he said, helping her to her feet. "We're going to the hospital." For once, she didn't argue. The drive to town was tense. Lucy's breathing labored beside him. James pushed the truck faster than was safe on the rain-slicked roads, one hand on the wheel, the other holding Lucy's. At the hospital, everything happened quickly. Lucy was whisked away while James was left to fill out paperwork he couldn't complete. He didn't know her last name, her birth date, her medical history. The realization of how little he knew about her hit him like a physical blow. Hours passed. James paced the waiting room, ignored the curious stares of townspeople, and prayed to a God he hadn't spoken to since Sarah died. Finally, a doctor appeared. "Mr. McKinnon? She's asking for you." Lucy lay in a hospital bed, looking exhausted but no longer in pain. Monitors beeped steadily beside her. "False labor," she explained as he approached. "Baby's fine. Just got a little excited yesterday." Relief made James's knees weak. He sank into the chair beside her bed. "Scared the hell out of me. Sorry about that." She attempted a smile. "Didn't mean to be a burden." "You're not." The words came out more forcefully than he intended. "You're not a burden, Lucy." She looked away, blinking rapidly. "They want to keep me overnight for observation. You should go home, get some rest." "I'll stay." "James." "I'll stay," he repeated firmly. Lucy's hand found his, squeezing gently. "Thank you." They sat in comfortable silence, the beeping monitors a reassuring rhythm. Eventually, Lucy drifted to sleep, her hand still in his. James watched her, thinking about how quickly she had become essential to his world. The doctor returned later, checking Lucy's vitals. "She'll be fine," he assured James. "But she'll need to take it easy these last weeks. No horseback riding, limited physical activity." James nodded. "I'll make sure of it." The doctor hesitated. "If you don't mind my asking, what exactly is your relationship to the patient?" The question caught James off guard. What was Lucy to him? Employer and employee? Friends? Something more complicated? "She's family," he said finally. The truth, even if not in the way the doctor assumed. When they returned to the ranch the next day, something had shifted between them. The careful distance they'd maintained dissolved, replaced by a quiet intimacy neither acknowledged directly. Lucy followed the doctor's orders, limiting herself to light housework and tending her garden. James found excuses to stay closer to home, reluctant to leave her alone for long. They spent evenings on the porch, talking about everything and nothing, the books they'd read, places they'd seen, dreams they'd set aside. One night, as stars filled the sky above them, Lucy asked the question that had hung between them for weeks. "What happens when the baby comes, James?" He turned to look at her, her profile silvered by moonlight. "What do you want to happen? I can't keep imposing on your kindness. It's not imposition if you're wanted." Lucy's breath caught. "Am I? Wanted?" James reached for her hand, choosing his words carefully. "When Sarah died, I thought that was it for me. Figured I'd live out my days alone on this ranch, and that would be enough." He paused, gathering courage. "It wasn't enough. Not until you came." "James, let me finish. I'm not good with words, never have been. But I know that the thought of you leaving ties my gut in knots. I know that this house feels like a home again with you in it." He took a deep breath. "I'm not asking for promises. Just stay, as long as you want. Make a life here, for you and the baby." Lucy's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Of wanting too much. Of losing it all again." "Me too." She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. Then we can be scared together. The days that followed were filled with preparation. James cleared out the spare room, transforming it into a nursery. He found his old crib in the attic, sanded and repainted it. Lucy sewed curtains and blankets. Her practical nature focused on the approaching birth. They didn't discuss the future beyond the baby's arrival, both afraid to tempt fate. But in 100 small ways, they built something neither had expected: a partnership, a shared life, the foundation of a family. June brought heat and the restless anticipation of waiting. Lucy grew uncomfortable, her body straining with the weight of the child. James found her one afternoon in the nursery, standing in the center of the room with a lost expression. "Everything all right?" he asked. She turned to him, vulnerability naked on her face. "What if I'm terrible at this? What if I don't know how to be a mother?" James crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "You'll learn. We both will. If you'll let me." Lucy's smile trembled. "I'd like that." The storm broke at midnight. Not rain this time, but Lucy's water. James woke to her standing in his doorway, face tight, with the first real contractions. "It's time," she said simply. The drive to the hospital was déjà vu, but with an urgency that left no room for fear. Lucy breathed through contractions while James drove, murmuring encouragement he wasn't sure she heard. This time, he wasn't left in the waiting room. Lucy gripped his hand and refused to let go, and no one tried to make him leave. For hours, he stood beside her, witnessing her strength and determination with awe. "You're doing great," he told her as the contractions intensified. "You're the strongest person I've ever known." Lucy laughed through her pain. "Remind me of that when I'm cursing your name." But she never cursed him. Instead, she held on to him like an anchor in a storm, her trust humbling him. Dawn was breaking when the final push brought their daughter into the world, red-faced and screaming, perfect in every way. The doctor placed her on Lucy's chest, and James watched as Lucy's expression transformed, wonder replacing exhaustion. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I've been waiting for you." James felt something crack open inside him, a dam breaking, emotions flooding through. When Lucy looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, and said, "Do you want to hold your daughter?" He couldn't speak, could only nod. The weight of the baby in his arms was familiar and strange at once. He'd held babies before, cousins' children, friends' little ones, but never one that was, in some indefinable way, his. She quieted in his arms, tiny fingers wrapping around his thumb with surprising strength. "She needs a name," Lucy said softly. James looked down at the infant, then back at Lucy. "What about Sarah?" Lucy's eyes widened. "Are you sure? I think she'd like that. A new Sarah for a new beginning." Lucy reached for his hand. "Sarah it is." They brought baby Sarah home 3 days later. The house welcomed them with sunlight streaming through windows Lucy had washed, fresh flowers on the table, a sense of rightness that James hadn't felt in years. That evening, after Sarah was fed and sleeping, James found Lucy on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the land in the same fiery colors as the night she'd arrived. "I have something for you," he said, joining her at the railing. From his pocket, he withdrew the playing card he'd carried for months, the Queen of Hearts. Lucy took it, fingers tracing the worn edges. "The card that changed everything," she murmured. "Not the card," James said. You changed everything." Lucy looked up at him, eyes searching his face. "I never told you why I was in that poker game. Why I was so desperate." "You don't have to. I want to." She took a deep breath. "I was running from the baby's father. He wasn't just a boyfriend who left. He was dangerous. Controlling. When I told him I was pregnant, he hurt me. Said no child of his would be raised by someone like me." Her voice steadied. "I took what money I could and ran. Been running ever since." James felt a cold fury at the man who had hurt her, followed by fierce protectiveness. "He won't find you here. And if he does, he'll have to go through me." Lucy's smile was sad. "That's not why I'm telling you. I'm telling you because I'm done running. Done being afraid." She placed the card over her heart. "I want to stay, James. Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because this is where I want to be. With you." James took her face in his hands, gently, reverently. "I love you, Lucy. Have for a while now. Probably since that first morning you made coffee in my kitchen." Her laugh was watery. "I love you too. Even when you're being stubborn. Especially then," he corrected and kissed her. The kiss was a promise, an affirmation, a beginning. When they parted, Lucy rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "What happens now?" she asked. James looked out over the land. His land, their land now. In the fading light, he could see not just what it had been, but what it could be. A home, a legacy, a place where love grew as steadily as the crops they planted. "Now," he said, "we live." The next morning, James rose early. While Lucy and Sarah slept, he walked to the far corner of the yard, where the best sunlight fell. There, he dug a hole and planted a sapling, an oak that would take decades to reach its full height. As he patted the soil around its tender roots, he thought about the women who had shaped his life. Sarah, who had taught him to love. Lucy, who had taught him to live again. And now little Sarah, who would grow alongside this tree, strong and true. When he returned to the house, he found Lucy in the kitchen, the baby cradled in one arm, while she somehow managed to make coffee with the other. She smiled when she saw him, and James knew with bone-deep certainty that he had found his way home. Not to the ranch, he'd never really left that, but to the heart of what mattered. To family, to love, to the courage to begin again. Outside, the new day brightened over Blackwater Ranch. The land remained the same, beautiful, demanding, enduring. But the people who worked it had changed, transformed by the unexpected hand that fate had dealt them. Sometimes, James thought as he took his daughter into his arms, the greatest gambles yield the richest rewards. Total _char_count, 27,315.